Memoirs of Arthur O Neill, The Third Journey. At the time I heard of the first ball in Granard, I was at my brother Ferdinand's at Glenarb in the county Tyrone, from whence I pushed towards the county of Longford without meeting with anything particular, only touching at some gentlemen's houses on my way. I met Paddy Kerr, the Harper, who was going to Granard also. I remained in and about Granard before the ball commenced. These annual Granard balls began in the following manner. A Mr. James Dungan, a native of Granard and a very extensive merchant, at the time residing in Copenhagen in Denmark, having heard in some manner that the gentlemen in Scotland encouraged annual meetings or competitions among Highland pipers, where premiums were awarded to the best performers. Dungan, through national ardour, anxious to preserve and support the original instrument of his own country, remitted to his friends in and about Granard a sufficient sum of money to defray the expenses of the three celebrated balls held there in the years 1781, 82 and 83. And it is to be lamented, says Duncan in a letter to his friends, that persons placed in high situations, who have it in their power to do the most good by their rank and wealth for their own country, are, I am sorry to hear, the least disposed to do it. I will not attempt to say whether by habit or inclination. I am informed they know nothing of Irish music or Irish misery only by the name. So great are their desires to support modern English music, and I consider my native country half a century behind Scotland in encouraging and rewarding the best performers on the bagpipe, which, if preferred to the wired harp, strongly evinces our taste. The Welsh harp is increasing, the Scotch bagpipes are increasing, but poor Ireland's harp is decreasing. If I was amongst you, it would not be the case. Farewell, or my friends, and I hope you will amongst yourselves support what I make bold to dictate to you. P.S. Why not make or establish a fund for the above purpose? I don't want you to imitate the Scotch, but the ancient Irish. Adieu. 1781, the first ball at Granard. The Harpers present, 7 Harpers. Charles Fanning, Hugh Higgins, Arthur O Neill, Charlie Berrien, Patrick Kerr, Rose Mooney and Patrick Maguire. They all played their best tunes. Charles Fanning got first premium, 10 guineas for The Coolin. I got second for The Green Woods of Trua and Mrs. Crofton, 8 guineas. And Rose Mooney got the third for Planxty Burke, 5 guineas. So let's have a look at those tunes. Now we've had The Coolin already, so okay, so for that tune there, The Green Woods of Trua, I've come across actually 3 versions of the song with similar names. They're all called The Woods of Trua, but one of them is called The Green Woods of Trua, the other is called The Stately Woods of Trua, and the other is The Shady Woods of Trua. So I'm just going to give, they're very, very short each, so I'm just going to give 2 of my favourites. So because he said The Green Woods of Trua, we'll look at that one first, The Green Woods, and then we'll do The Shady Woods. So this is what Arthur O Neill says. He says The Green Woods of Trua. Now this is the Shady Woods of Trua, and I'm including this one because, well, first of all, it's played on uilleann pipes, um, and second of all, it has that strange kind of archaic sounds that you do get in some of these tunes. I love it particularly. There's a strange sort of a twisty kind of haunted, bended notes. This is a sound that I'm often kind of trying to describe that I can't really describe too much. So, simply because as well, it just has the woods of Trua in the title, and I know titles can get mixed up at times. So I'm including this one as well. And as I say, it has that archaic kind of sound in the tune. So here's the Shady Woods of Trua. And this is Mrs. Crafton. Right, so that was Charles Fanning got the first premium of 10 guineas for doing the cooling. I got the second for the Greenwoods of Trua and Mrs. Crafton, 8 guineas. And Rose Mooney got the third for Planxty Burke, 5 guineas. And here's Planxty Burke. So Rose Mooney got the third for that one. Planksley Burke, she got 5 guineas. The judges at the first ball were excellent, and there was some deliberation about the first premium between Fanning and me, but in consequence of my endeavouring to appear on this occasion in my very best studs, they decided in favour of Charlie, who was careless in his dress, saying at the time that he wanted money more than I did. However, I received many handsome verbal compliments besides the 8 guineas premium. To the best of my opinion, there were at least 500 persons at the ball. It was held in the market house of Granard, and Mr. Burrows was one of the stewards, who was a tolerable judge of music, and who was so angry at the decision of the premiums that he thrust his cane through one of the windows. Patrick Riley prepared the supper. After this ball, I became a favourite in and about Granard, and where I remained for about 4 months, and my company much sought for. I will not attempt to say how I deserved such attention, only that I was then more cautious of avoiding inebriation than the other Harpers, and kept as little of their company as possible. On my way home from the County Longford, I made my way home and stopped with Philip Riley of Murray in the County Cavan. This gentleman was the original means afterwards of my coming to the Belfast ball in 1792. With him I remained some months, and then came to Archdeacon Caulfield's of Castle Cosby, with whom I spent a very agreeable fortnight, without anything particular occurring, and from thence I visited all the gentlemen alternately, herein before named, in and about the counties of Cavan, Armagh, Monaghan and Tyrone, where I remained until the approach of the period of the second Granard ball in June of 1782. Granard, the second ball. About the month of March, I made my way again for Granard, and as usual touched again at all my acquaintances in the gentlemen's houses. I remained some time with a Reverend Mr. Sneyd, rector of Lurgan, County Cavan, successor to Parson Sterling, the celebrated bagpiper and composer of the tune of The Priest of Lurgan. And there's a little comment there on the Parson Sterling, the celebrated bagpiper. It says, Parson Sterling was a noted performer on the pipes and composer as well. Lady Morgan, in her Memoirs, mentions another piper parson in the person of the Reverend Charles MacLean, nephew of the dramatist of that name. He lost accuracy through having used his pipes in the pulpit to play out his congregation. Dr. W. H. Grattan Flood records in his History of Irish Music an instance of an English visitor to the Catholic Bishop of Kilmore being much surprised to see among the portraits of former bishops of the diocese a picture of a piper in Highland costume. He was informed that this represented Bishop Richardson, who, being a skilled musician, availed himself of this disguise in order to visit and console his scattered hook. Now, unfortunately, I can't find that tune, The Priest of Lurgan. But anyway, so what does he say? I remained some time with a Reverend Mr. Sneyd, rector of Lurgan, County Cavan, successor to Pastor Sterling, the celebrated bagpiper and composer of the tune The Priest of Lurgan. And from thence to Captain Fleming's of Belleville, County Cavan, where I remained about 3 weeks. He was a captain of volunteers, a lover of music, uncommonly hospitable, but not a proficient in music. From thence to Lismore to Cosby Nesbitt's. He was I don't know what that word is, something, it's like misspelled, gentleman in every respect. I think finished. He was a something gentleman in every respect, with whom I remained a few days. I then went into the county of Longford and went to see Captain Boyers of Mount Pleasant, with whom I chiefly remained until the ball was preparing, for he was one of the most comical geniuses I ever met. He knew something of music and delighted in the harp, although he played very well on the violin. At the second ball, the Harpers presents were, and there was 9 Harpers at this one. There was Charles Fanning, Hugh Higgins, Arthur O Neill, Ned MacDermot Rowe, Paddy Kerr, Rose Mooney, Pat Maguire, Kate Martin, and Charlie Burrian, who all played as their who all played as usual their best tunes, but the premiums were reduced this year. The first to 8 guineas, the second to 6 guineas, and the third to 4. Charlie Fanning got the first, I got the second, and Rose Mooney got the third. Charles Fanning got the first for the Coolin again. I got the second for the Green Woods of Trua and the Fairy Queen. And Rose Mooney got the third premium, but I don't remember for what tunes. So it was the same 3 people came first, second, and third. Charles Fanning got the first one again for playing the. What did he play? The Coolin. And Arthur came second again for the Green Woods of Trua, and Rose Mooney got the third, but he doesn't remember what. So the same 3 people. But as well, he said he got the second for the Green Woods of Trua and the Fairy Queen. Right, so then it says Rose Mooney got the third premium, but I do not remember for what tunes. Higgins got somehow huffed and retired without playing a single tune. A Major Smith who knew nothing of music was appointed one of the judges. He declared, "By heaven, they made me a judge because they knew I knew nothing about it." The company at the second ball was more numerous than the first, and when all was over, I just took the same route home in a similar manner as described on my return from the first. Only on this, my second return, I stopped at a Peter O'Connell of Crannery in the county of Longford. He could sing and compose well, and no end to his hospitality. And Mr. Connell had a humorous servant named Jack Hart, who sung both English and Irish songs, as well as Mr. Owenson, the comedian, could. And a little note about Mr. Owenson, the comedian. He was a popular Dublin actor, and for a time, though disastrously actor manager in the National Theatre Music Hall, and was in the height of his fame during the stirring volunteer and Grattan's Parliament era of history. A Connacht man by birth, he studied under Dr. Wargan of Westminster Abbey, returning to settle in Ireland in 1770. He was one of the first to introduce a pianoforte to an Irish audience. This was in 1785. His forte lay in singing old Irish songs in character and he had a vast collection of them. His musical talent was inherited by his daughter, Sydney Owenson, author of The Wild Irish Girl and other novels, and known to fame and in society as Lady Morgan. In her chatty journal, there are many references to her father's traditional style of singing. His last appearance on the stage was in an operetta written by her in collaboration with Tom Cook entitled The Whim of the Moment, which was produced on the 5th of March 1807, the Lord Lieutenant attending in state. In 1802, Owenson had been mainly instrumental in founding the Kilkenny Theatre, in which Thomas Moore later on graced the boards, and where he wooed and won his wife, Bessie Dyke, an actress in the theatre. He died in May 1812 and was passionately mourned by his daughter, who was distinguished by loyal affection to her family through all changes of fortune. Sydney Owenson had some correspondence with Arthur O Neill, who was referred to in one of the notes to her novel The Wild Irish Girl. So anyway, he says, Mr. Connell had a humorous servant named Jack Hart who sung both English and Irish songs, as well as Mr. Owenson, the comedian, could. Right. So one day, taking his master's horses to be shod, he had to pass by Captain Boyer's door and was accosted by the captain. Hart was in the meantime singing the song of Speak of Yo with a chorus of Aber Aru. Blast you, come in, said Boyers, until I give you a dram. On this, Hart alighted and walked into Boyer's house, who had at the time 10 gallons of shrub in the house, and between singing and drinking they never stopped for the space of 2 days and 2 nights, and never parted until the shrub was entirely finished. Mr. Connell, in the meantime, imagined his man and horses to be lost, but when the shrub was out, Hart brought the horses to the farriers to be shod, and returned home the 3rd day. Mr. Connell, of course, brought him to account for his conduct. Hart, without reserve, told him the whole story about the 10 gallons of shrub. Damn your body, says Connell, did you finish it? Damn me if we didn't. With a little help, says Hart. Why then, damn me, but I forgive you, and I never would if you had left a single drop, said Mr. Connell. Mr. Connell informed me afterwards that Boyers was very parsimonious only when seeing company, when he would spare no expense to entertain the guests. Always on my return from Granard balls, I stopped at Councillor Edgeworth's of Edgeworthstown, where I was well entertained. So there's a nice little bit here about the Edgeworths of Edgeworthstown. Councillor Edgeworth, here referred to, was the father of Maria Edgeworth, the famous novelist. None of her stories make as interesting and romantic reading as her edition of her father's life. It is largely an autobiography by Richard Edgeworth himself, in which he tells the story of his 4 marriages and describes the eccentric wooing of his friend Thomas Day, author of Sandford and Merton, a philosopher of the school of Rousseau. One of his ventures, when in search of a wife, was the adoption of an orphan girl, Sabrina, whom he endeavoured to train according to his ideals. This incident has been dramatised recently in the successful play Mice and Men. Edgeworth was something of a scientist and inventor, and he anticipated the bicycle and gave much attention to developing a system of transmitting news by semaphore signals before the days of telegraphy. With French invasions threatening, his scheme was of particular importance. In 1798, Edgeworth and his numerous family, including his 4th wife, vacated the family seat on the approach of the insurgent forces. On their return home, they found that though the house had been visited, nothing had been stolen or even disturbed. Edgeworth's philanthropic efforts to improve the conditions of the country had so endeared him to the peasantry. In advanced age he caught his last illness through over-exertion and exposure when investigating the bogs and swamps of the Midlands of Ireland, a view with a view to their reclamation. In a letter to Lady Morgan after the publication of her novel The Wild Irish Girl in 1806, Mr. Edward wrote, "I believe that some of the Harpers you mention were the Harpers' prize ball at Granard near this place in 1782 or 1783. One female harper of the name of Bridget obtained the second prize. Fallon carried off the first. I think I have heard the double-headed man. My daughter published an essay on the subject of that prize in an obscure newspaper of which we have no copy." This letter is inaccurate, and therefore very likely Mr. Edgeworth had not met old O'Neill during his visit to his house after the Granard balls, and his recollections were from hearsay. Bridget is of course Rose Mooney, Fallon Fanning. O'Neill is not mentioned, but he possibly inspired Maria Edgeworth's newspaper article. So he says, "I taught two young ladies, Miss Farrell and Miss Plunkett, who lived in that neighbourhood, to play on the harp. Miss Farrell played handsomely, Miss Plunkett middling. I next came to a Cormac O'Neill of Fardrumhon in the county Longford. He was an eccentric genius, and kept a house not unlike an academy, such as dancing masters, music masters, classical masters of modern languages, he having 4 sons and 3 daughters, on whom he spared no expense. I next went to Felix O'Neill's of Edenbawn, and Toby Payton's of Lahane, both in the county Leitrim, where nothing but hospitality occurred to me, next to Colonel Gore's of Woodford, and thence to Andrew O'Rourke's of Creevy in County Leitrim, where I got a letter from my friend Hugh O'Neill inviting me to come to him to a Mr. Brown's of Clonfad, at Churchland. I accordingly came to him, and after some time he informed me that Conor O'Kelly, a harp maker, was making one for him. As this O'Kelly was a very peevish man, he requested me to go and endeavour to keep him in temper. While the harp was making, for fear of disappointment, I attended on Kelly, and by means of treats and jokes he contrived to finish it, but it had to be taken asunder, as when it was tuned the treble was thought too long. It had 40 strings, 35 in general being considered enough. The harp was a second time put together, and turned out the best one I ever heard or played upon. It then only wanted varnishing to make it a nonsuch, and a Mrs. Keane of Carrick-on-Shannon, something, don't know what that word says, wanted 3 guineas to varnish and burnish it, which Hugh declined. I, being well acquainted in Longford, informed her I could get it done there, and cheaper, which he agreed to do. I took the harp then accordingly, and a Mr. O'Sullivan finished it properly. This O'Sullivan was like many other mechanics of merit, a harum-scarum, good-natured fellow, with whom I spent a humorous time while he was finishing the harp. When returning back to Mr. Brown's, where Hugh was waiting for me, I met a new married lady on the road, a Miss Hamilton of Kilnacarra, who invited me to her house. I went to it, where I played several tunes. She was much inclined to detain me, but I was impatient to see Hugh, and never stopped until I came to him. He was impatient to try the harp, and when he got it into his hands, he played the tune of Limerick's Lamentation. or Tom Conlon's stolen tune, which he called Lochaber No More in Scotland. He was so well pleased that he exclaimed, "It answers my utmost fancy." Okay, this is quite an interesting bit about the music here when he's describing. He says, so he goes to his friend Hugh. So he says, yeah, he says he was in Hugh. So he's talking about Hugh. He says he was impatient to try the harp, and when he got it into his hands, he played the tune of Limerick's Lamentation, or Tom Conlon's stolen tune, which he called Lochaber No More in Scotland. And then he says he was so well pleased that he exclaimed, "It answers my utmost fancy." But just a little bit about those tunes there, Limerick's Lamentations, and then the way he says, or Tom Conlon's stolen tune, which he called Lochaber No More. Let's just hear Limerick's Lamentations and then Lochaber No More. Right, so that was Limerick's Lamentations. So here's Lochaber No More, the Scotch tune, bagpipes tune. As you can hear, it's kind of similar. There's a few little similarities, but sort of different as well. So I think you'll hear it now. I think there seems to be a bit of confusion about the two tunes. So here's Lochaber No More. Right, so back to the story. It said he was impatient to try the harp, and when he got his hands on it, he played the tune of Limerick's Lamentations, or Tom Conlon's stolen tune, which he called Lochaber No More in Scotland. So here's the note about Tom Conlon. Tom Conlon was born in about 1640 at Clonmahon in County Sligo, composer of The Dawning of the Day, The Golden Star, Love in Secret, Bonnie Jean. Now these are all tunes. I'm not going to do this now but this is definitely something to look into. This fella, if he was born in 1640 and he composed all these tunes, these are early tunes. So anyway, so he composed the composer of The Dawning of the Day, The Golden Star, Love in Secret, Bonnie Jean, The Jointure, Molly St. George, the air of Limerick's lamentation, known in Scotland as Lochaber No More, was often mistakenly attributed to him. He likely helped to naturalise it in that country, but the Belfast Harpers, one and all, attributed it to one Miss Riley, Miles Riley, a Cavan man who lived at the same time as Conlon. Right, so that's interesting. It says the air of Limerick's lamentation, known in Scotland as Lochaber No More, was often mistakenly attributed to Tom Conlon. And then it just says, he likely helped to naturalise it in that country, but all the Belfast Harpers, one and all, attributed it to Miles Riley, a Cavan man who lived at the same time as Conlon. William Conlon, a younger brother, was also a harper, and he composed Lady Iva, Sive Kelly, and Molly McAlpin. The latter air was adopted by Moore as Remember the Glories of Brian the Brave. So Arthur goes on to say, I next rambled to Charles O'Connor's of Ballinagar, the county of Roscommon, the celebrated Irish antiquarian and, I may add, historian, who was one of the most learned men that Ireland has produced. Hugh and I were invited there, and indeed we extended our mutual abilities to please that worthy gentleman with our best tunes and airs. Mr. O'Connor was himself an excellent performer on the harp, and one of the best amateurs I ever heard. We stopped with him about a fortnight, and in consequence of the uncommon attention that was paid us by that gentleman, we only imagined it like a summer's day. I parted Hugh at Ballinagar. I next came to Charles White's in the county Sligo, where, as usual in that hospitable province, I experienced the highest respect and attention. I remained a few days at this time, but often visited him from the year 1785 till 1795, as he was one of my greatest favourites. I next came to Charles White. Oh, sorry, you said that. He died in 1795 and left an only son, Robert White, a real counterpart of his father, whom I also visited until 1803, in which year he died. I went to a Mr. James Irvine of Streamstown, County Sligo. I am totally at a loss how to describe that gentleman's manner of living at his own house and among his tenantry. He had an ample fortune. He was an amateur. He had 4 sons and 3 daughters, who were all proficient in music. No instrument was unknown to them. There was at one time a meeting in his house of 46 musicians who played in the following order. The 3 Miss Irvines on the piano, myself on the harp, gentlemen flutes, there was 6 of them, gentlemen violin cellos, 2 of them, common pipers, 10, gentlemen fiddlers, 20, gentlemen clarinets, 4. So that's interesting for us, like as pipers, like there was 10, as he called them, common pipers. At the hour this gentleman's customary meetings were finished, some guests contiguous to their own places went home, but those who lived some miles off remained, and in order to accommodate them, Mr. and Mrs. Irvine lay on chairs that night in the parlour. For my own part, I never spent a more agreeable night, either in bed or out of bed. I next went to the town of Sligo, where I slept that night, and next morning went to a parson Phibbs, a credit to the cloth, of Ard Laharley, near Ballymouth. He loved music and encouraged it, and he played well on that weird instrument called the dulcimer. If it was not that I wanted to see my friends, I could have lived with him forever. I went from thence to Captain Irvine's of Tondrago in County Sligo, a finished gentleman. He was a captain of volunteers for 16 years, and in the Queen of Hungary's service he distinguished himself as an Irishman not inferior to the celebrated Count Lacy. From Mr. Irvine's I came to Mrs. Crofton's of Longford, the name of her seat in the County Sligo. She was the mother of Sir Malby Crofton, and the lady for whom Caroline composed the lion tune of Mrs. Crofton. Lady Morgan mentions her frequently in her memoirs, and the Croftons were relatives of Lady Morgan's father. And we already heard Mrs. Crofton earlier. I remained there only a few days, and then came to Parson Hawkes of Screen in the County Sligo. He was very like Parson Phibbs in gentility and every other respect. He detained me a week. From thence I came to Mr. Jones of Arney Glass, next to Arthur Cooper's of Tansy Hill, next to Mr. White of Ballintoker, all in the County Sligo, where I generally stopped a few days and was uncommonly well treated without anything particular happening to me. I next came into the County Leitrim to a Cornelius O'Donnell's of Larkfield, where I again met my dear Hugh O'Neill, who was there on a visit, being contiguous to his own farm in the County Roscommon and near the boundaries of the counties of Roscommon and Leitrim. He brought me back with him to his farm of Lisconnor or Fort Connor. Lis signifies a fort. He walked me through it and described the beauties, and could point out the best part of it as well as a man that had the gift of eyesight. And when done, he says to me, "Arthur, you are my relation and favourite, and if you should survive me, this farm shall be yours. Accidents accepted in case I should not make a will. See this field, see that field, look at all, Arthur, which shall be yours." "I see them very plainly, Hugh," says I, "and thank you, my friend." He then brought me to his own house, and we spent that night very happy. He then brought me to Mr. Jameson, his landlord, that good landlord who would not accept of Hugh's annual rent of £20, but also gave him a receipt of £20 a year more on the same concern. From thence I went to Tom McGovern's of Portnaladden in County Leitrim. No end to his good nature. He was a genteel, substantial farmer, and lived in a style beyond the common. I next came to the County Fermanagh and spent a few nights with Sir James Colville very happily. I next came into the County Tyrone and stopped at Ned Conway's near Newton Stewart. He had a daughter that played the harp uncommon well. Miss Conway and I were closeted together for 3 weeks, exchanging tunes. She gave me the tune of Dr. Hart, and I gave her the tune of Madge Malone, and several other tunes mutually that I cannot remember at present, but left the house on the best of terms. So he says she gave me the tune of Dr. Hart, so here it is. And he says, and I gave her the tune of Madge Malone. So I gave her the tune of Madge Malone and several other tunes mutually that I cannot remember at present, but left the house on the best of terms. I proceeded now to another Ned Conway's of Montreloney in the county Tyrone, who received me as well as his namesake, and indeed my intention was to spend my Christmas with Mr. Blackall of Ballinascreen in the county Derry, but was prevented in consequence of the snow that fell at a period, so much snow that the deepest quarries were level with the high road, in consequence of which many travellers fell victims to their ignorance of the roads. I next went to Mr. Blackall's, who excused me in consequence of the fatality of the snow, and rejoiced that I escaped it. This was in the year of 1785 or 1786. From that I came to Ballyinenna, County Tyrone, and from thence I went to see my brother Ferdinand of Glenarb, County Tyrone, near Caeldon, when resting my bones between riding and walking. I spent near 6 months going to and visiting Mr. Strong of Fairview, Captain Neville of Mount Irvine, the Reverend Dr. Clark, Rector of Clonfeckle, Captain Houston of Tillydowie, Sir W. Richardson of Ochar, Dean Keating of Clocher, who would not let me touch a harp in his house, but indulged me in playing the enticing game of backgammon, whom I always excelled, blind as I was. Thence I went to Mr. Stacks of Stacks Grove, County Monaghan, where I remained 8 or 10 days, and again returned to my brother Ferdinand, and continued in and about that neighbourhood until the time of the 3rd Granard Ball, which was announced, and I heard that James Dungan, of ever-respected memory, the author and instigator of the 3 balls, would attend there. He came particularly from Copenhagen, amongst other business, to superintend the last and greatest Irish national ball respecting harpers that ever was held in this country. I met Mr. Dungan there, and will speak of him in course, if on the occasion of the 3rd ball in Granard. Moreover, I will endeavour to show in these memoirs how folly and fashion will neglect the real merits of those who take pains and prefer to encourage the works of a Sir John plagiarist, or a Sir John selector, or a Sir John innovator, or a Sir John Stevenson. And it just says there, Sir John Stevenson was a fashionable teacher and an organist of St Patrick's Cathedral, Dublin, a friend of Thomas Moore and arranger of Moore's Irish melodies. He was knighted in 1803. If my friend hereinafter named should seek for the empty title of a knight bachelor, he might be sure of being appointed to it if a Townsend or Rutland were to visit this country. But this barren knight should, in my opinion, confine himself to his business in Dublin, and not interfere with Mr. Bunting, and I shall also endeavour to draw a contrast between the reviver and the restorer of ancient Irish music, and a titled upstart that attempts to plaster his works upon those who I will not take pains to look for the works of Mr. B, meaning probably Mr. Bunting. So I think now, I don't know a whole lot about this subject, but I gathered this off one or two things before, that this is a go at Thomas Moore, Tom Moore and Tom Moore's melodies, because it's just the way he says this about this Stevenson fella, the organist. Like he says, I will endeavour to show in these memoirs how folly and fashion will neglect the real merits of those who take pains and prefer to encourage the works of a Sir John plagiarist, or a Sir John selector, or a Sir John innovator, or a Sir John Stevenson. So, a plagiarist, a selector, or an innovator, John Stevenson. If my friend herein after named should seek for the empty title of a knight's bachelor, yeah, he might be sure of being appointed to it if a Townsend or Rutland were to visit this country. But this barren knight should, in my opinion, confine himself to his business in Dublin, and not interfere with Mr. Bunting. So that's I think that's sort of having a go at Tom Moore, I think it is, for sort of plagiarising or kind of robbing the efforts of Bunting. This is my impression. I don't know too much about this, and it's just the way it says, and I shall also endeavour to draw a contrast between the reviver and the restorer of ancient Irish music. So he endeavours to draw a contrast between the reviver and the restorer of ancient Irish music, which would be Bunting, I presume, and a titled upstart that attempts to plaster his works upon those who will not take pains to look after the works of Mr. Bunting. Well, he doesn't say Bunting, he calls him Mr. B, so he calls the other chap a titled upstart. Anyway, let's get on with it. After remaining with my friends in and about County Tyrone in the usual manner for about 9 months, I then began to prepare myself for the third Granard ball, and set out accordingly, and trucked or stopped at almost every house mentioned in my going to the first and second ball, until I got to Mr. James O'Reilly of Higginstown, County Longford, with whom I remained till the ball commenced, when the following Harpers and a few more that I cannot recollect attended. Okay, and he names 9 Harpers: Charles Fanning, Charles Berrien, Arthur O Neill, Ned MacDermot Rowe, Hugh Higgins, Rose Mooney, Lawrence Keane, Kate Martin, and James Duncan. The premiums were the same as at the second ball, that is, 8 guineas the first, 6 guineas the second, and 4 guineas the third. Fanning always deservedly got the first. I got the second, and poor Rose Mooney, as usual, got the third. So it was the same result the third time round. It says Fanning always deservedly got the first, I got the second, and poor Rose Mooney, as usual, got the third. A gentleman named Miles Keane railed uncommonly about the distribution of the premiums and swore a great oath that it was the most nefarious decision he ever witnessed. I don't know what he meant, but heard the expression. Lord and Lady Longford attended this ball, and the meeting was vastly more numerous than the two former ones. Quality from 40 miles attended, and there was not a house in the town but was filled with ladies and gentlemen, and the town was like a horse fair, and there was not stabling for the 20th part that came. There were at least 1,000 people at the ball. In consequence of the Harpers who received no premiums being formally neglected, I hinted a subscription, which was well received and performed, and indeed on distributing the collection their proportion exceeded our premiums. This ball was nearly being spoiled by means of a Bernard Riley of Ballymorris, who entertained some antipathy to Mr. Dungan, and took every pains to destroy the harmony of the ball. Mr. Dungan, the father of the 3 balls, came over from Copenhagen, as before mentioned, to see how the 3rd and last ball was conducted, and he got so much disgusted with the indecorous manner of the stewards and others who superintended the management of it, that he did not attend during the performance, but only at supper. There was a very handsome ode composed for Mr. Dungan on his arrival at Granard, but through jealousy or some other motive, he never saw either the ode or the composer. I dined with Mr. Dungan the day after the ball at the widow Riley's in Granard. I do not know how I deserved his attention, but I should sit next to him, and dined with him in different places. He acquired admiration and respect everywhere he visited, in consequence of his polished manners and gentlemanly accomplishments. He remained some time in and about Granard, and I understand he is now alive and well in Copenhagen. If there was a Duncan and a Bunting in each province in this kingdom, it is more easily imagined than my poor abilities can describe to what degree of grandeur the Irish harp and the music incident to it would arrive.